became the hunted. Within minutes of climbing the hill, Imo heard several shots crack through the still frozen air. Suddenly, an entire white-clad platoon of Soviet skiers emerged from the snow-covered landscape, rushing toward the Finns. As Imo and his comrades fired at the Soviets to their front, another platoon of Soviets slipped in behind them, trapping them in a pincer movement. With enemy troops closing in on both sides, panic gripped the group. The patrol made a quick retreat, firing their weapons as they did, desperately trying to put as much distance between them and the Soviets as they could. Imo was carrying ski track mines in his pack. He screamed at his comrades, pleading for covering fire so he could lay the traps. It was frantic. Bullets whizzed overhead. Imo and his team emptied their magazines, trying to keep the Soviets at bay. Eventually, Imo managed to lay the mines, but the enemy skied around them. The Soviets were relentless. Imo knew they had to get out of there. If they stood their ground, it would be a massacre. Imo gritted his teeth and charged to the front, determined to lay fresh tracks. The snow was knee-deep, which slowed the team down, all the while the Soviets were stalking them, hunting them. With all their attention now focused on survival, the Finns began skiing fast as they could. However, the cold air and the days without a proper meal started to hit Imo. His pace dropped, and he started to lag behind his platoon. His comrades urged him to keep up, but it was pointless. Each step became a struggle. As his men continued to pass him, Imo reached into his pocket. In a little plastic bottle, there were 30 pills of Pervitin. Pervitin was essentially crystal meth in a pill form that was issued to all frontline Axis troops to help them stay awake and be more energized, with the ability to make a tired, hungry soldier not want to eat or sleep for days with just a single pill. It was a miracle drug. At that moment, Imo needed an energy boost, something to keep him alive. But with his bulky snow gloves, it was impossible to grab a single pill. Instead, fearing the Soviets more than what Pervitin would do to his body, he swallowed all 30 pills. Almost instantly, Imo felt a surge of energy course through his veins. The tiredness was gone. He felt alive, invigorated. He surged ahead of his comrades, getting faster and faster. But soon he came crashing back down to earth. His world began to get blurry. His final thought before blacking out was that this mistake may very well be his last. When Imo finally came around a day or two later, he was alone, still suffering from the effects of Pervitin. He searched his belongings. He had no ammunition, food, or water, and from his last memory, he had skied over 100 kilometers from the battle site. Figuring that his best option was to head southwest, he set off again. However, he soon blacked out again and found himself tumbling down a hill. As Imo struggled to his feet, he noticed smoke in the distance. It was a campfire, and that meant safety. Imo began skiing headlong toward his comrades, or so he thought. As he got closer to the camp, he realized that it was the Soviets his platoon had engaged with a day or two before. But Imo didn't stop. The Soviets simply stared in disbelief as he skied right through their camp, with some soldiers moving their feet out of the way to make room for him. After Imo was almost clear of the camp, the Soviets sent a few pot shots his way, but by that point he was careening deep into the Finnish wilderness. Behind him, a Soviet ski patrol was pursuing, getting within 20 yards of Imo as he climbed a hill. Imo pushed on, reaching the top of the hill, where he took off at breakneck speed and finally shook his pursuers. However, the worst was still yet to come. For the next several days and nights, Imo kept on skiing, only stopping to boil water for hot tea. To stave off hunger, Imo resorted to ripping fresh pine tips from the trees and making them into a stew. With no end in sight to his journey, Imo began to start seeing some strange things. One evening, as he was trying to get some sleep, he heard a wolverine circling him. With no ammunition for his submachine gun, Imo pulled out his knife and goaded the animal to attack. After several minutes of this back and forth, the wolverine finally showed itself, snarling and snapping at Imo. The wolf attacked, and Imo charged headlong into it. With his knife, he repeatedly stabbed the beast until it was dead. Only, it wasn't. In fact, there wasn't a wolverine at all. When Imo came to, he realized that he had been repeatedly stabbing a tree. Later on, he hallucinated one of his friends leading him toward a tree line. Once inside it, he burst through the trees and came upon a hunting lodge. Imo made himself right at home by starting a fire directly on the floor. Perhaps too exhausted to care about what was happening around him, he tried to fall asleep as the inferno grew. With the cabin destroyed, Imo simply went to the sauna next door and started its furnace. Finally warm for the first time in almost a week, he fell asleep for almost a full day. Rested but still feeling the effects of the Pervitin, Imo continued his journey and found a ski track in the snow. Sensing that this would be his best option for getting rescued, he continued along it